Exclusive contract from Feilu Novel Network Novel. Siheyuan. Picked up at the beginning to be son.in.law, Lin Yang traveled from the end of the world to the Lin family village in Changping in the 5th or 3rd year. After his grandfather died, he wandered around the 49th city and passed out in an alley. He was picked up by a passing woman and became his son.in.law. Unexpectedly, he was full of love for the world of quadrangle courtyards, so he relied on the foundation of his past life to live a peaceful life in the quadrangle courtyard, and of course, he couldn't help but have some trivial matters with the people in the courtyard. Feilu Novel Network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. Chapter 1. Being picked up and returned home. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 4 or 9 cities. In the winter of 1953, pedestrians hurriedly walked on the cold and icy road, clutching thick cotton clothes, and white hugs appeared in front of them as they breathed. In an alleyway in Nanluoga Lane, Wang Xiuji was facing the cold wind with a worried expression on her face. Suddenly, she stumbled and turned her head to see a person lying on the side of the road. She hesitated for a moment and squatted down to explore her breath. Wang Xiuji patted her chest and said, "It's okay, there's still breath." Wang Xiuji is a widow who lives in number 95 Courtyard, Nanluoga Lane. Due to her husband's early death with only one daughter, she was bullied in the courtyard, and the people in the courtyard were all thinking of becoming homeless, so the mother and daughter lived a difficult life. It's not coming soon for the Chinese New Year, and there's no rice left to cook at home. Wang Xiuji braved the cold wind and came out to find some work, but when she returned empty-handed, she felt a bit dazed and stumbled on this person. Wang Xiuji carefully examined the child, who was about 15 or 16 years old. Although her face was dirty, she could still see that she was very beautiful. As she watched the child reminisce about the dirty things in the courtyard, Wang Xiuji's heart moved and she gritted her teeth, carrying the child on her back and walking towards the courtyard. Wang Xiuji returned to the courtyard on her back, panting heavily. Standing at the door was a middle-aged man with sleeves. When she saw Wang Xiuji come in to hold her glasses, she asked, "Where did you get this flower, Wang Xiuji?" Wang Xiuji smiled and said, "Uncle San, this is a relative of my family who is starving. You should be busy first, and I will quickly go back and give him a stutter, otherwise something big will happen in this cold weather." As she was speaking, a pretty girl wearing a thin floral jacket walked out and saw her mother carrying someone on her back without asking any questions. She stepped forward to help Wang Xiuji help her into the room. As Yan Fugue watched the three of them enter the house, he shook his head and thought to himself, "It's already quite difficult for you two, mother and daughter. Now that you've added a mouth, you'll have some days to live. But you also have a plan in mind. If Wang Xiuji's family can't survive and go back to the countryside, can this house be taken first?" Yan Fugue also knew that there were many people in the courtyard who were concerned about the house of Wang Xiuji's family, especially the Jia and Lu families. The Jia family only had one room, and Jia Dongxiu was not young because he didn't have a house. He even talked about several relatives, but the 2 rooms of Lu Haizhong's 3 sons were not spacious. Moreover, Lu Guangqi was also at the age of marriage. Yan Fugue thought about his little plan in his heart and suddenly shuddered all over. He tightly wrapped himself in his clothes and muttered, "This damn innocence is cool." After saying that, he turned around and went home. Yan Fugue's neighbor Wang Xiuji's house, Lin Chuan frowned and asked, "Mom, what's going on with him? Don't you know that our family can't even afford it? How can we survive if we keep talking too much?" Wang Xiuji came to the bedside with a bowl of hot water and sighed, "Chu Ran, as you know, our mother and daughter don't work and live by doing odd jobs. The courtyard is waiting to see our family's jokes, so they can squeeze us out and take our house. Originally, my mother planned to sell the house back to the village so that we could have a meal, but today when I met this child, my mother had an idea in her heart." After saying this, she shared her thoughts with her daughter. Lin Chuan figured out the cause and effect, and then looked at the person lying on the con. His shy face turned red and he stomped his feet angrily. "Mom, what are you saying? I'm only 16 years old and not yet married. Besides, how can you guarantee that this person is good?" Wang Xiuji smiled slightly and said, "Silly child, he doesn't look very old. We've been together for a few years, and if someone is good, we'll talk about your marriage. Mom looks at this child and he's also handsome. It's not unfair to be a good match for you. If he becomes our family, there will also be a man to support the family, so we won't be bullied anymore." Lin Chuan blushed and kept stirring the corners of his clothes, saying, "Mom, I'm ignoring you." After finishing, he ran into the room. Wang Xiuji saw that her daughter did not resist this matter, and she had some confidence in her heart. She smiled and fed the water to the young man. After a bowl of hot water was poured down, the young man slowly opened his eyes, but his eyes were confused. Wang Xiuji saw someone wake up and asked with a smile, "Child, where are you still uncomfortable when you wake up?" Lin Yang opened his eyes in a daze, and then a wave of information merged into his mind. Lin Yang was originally a survivor of the apocalypse, but once again fell from a battle with a ferocious beast. When he opened his eyes again, he arrived in the 1950s. Formerly known as Lin Yang, he was from the Lin family village in Changping. His parents passed away early and he was mistreated by his second uncle and aunt. He hardly had enough to eat. Recently, his only beloved grandfather also went, and his second uncle kicked him out of the house. Formerly known as an angry person, he went all the way to the 49th city to find a way to survive. But he didn't know that the work in the 49 cities was also a trap. He couldn't find the job and collapsed in the alleyway, just as he was rescued by the woman in front of him. Lin Yang struggled to sit up and gratefully said, "Thank you, Auntie, for saving me." Wang Xiuji waved her hand and smiled, "Your body is too weak. Let's eat something first before we talk." Turning to Lin Chuan who ran into the house, he shouted, "Chuan, go and bring a bowl of congee." Lin Chuan came out and bowed his head to the kitchen to take a bowl of congee. Wang Xiuji took it and handed it to Lin Yang, saying, "Son, you should eat some congee first to warm up. Let's talk about it later." Lin Yang's body is too weak. He can't help licking his lips when he smells the congee burning in his stomach. Wang Xiuji looked at Lin Yang and sighed, "Child, there's nothing good about the difficulties at home. You can make do with it." Lin Yang also knew that people in Yuecheng were not rich this year. Nodding, he took congee and quickly finished it, handed it to Wang Xiuji and asked, "Aunt, where am I?" Wang Xiuji smiled and explained how she had encountered Lin Yang. Lin Yang knew that if it weren't for Wang Xiuji, she would have hung up as soon as she wore it, and she was determined to repay her well. Wang Xiuji said again, "Where are you from, child? How old are you? Why did you faint there?" Lin Yang smiled bitterly and said, "Auntie, my name is Lin Yang and I am 18 years old from the Lin family village in Changping." After hearing about Lin Yang's background, Wang Xiuji realized that Lin Yang looked at him because he didn't have enough nutrition. Unexpectedly, the child was already 18 years old, and she sighed, "He's also a hardworking child." "Alright, let's not talk about this for now. Please rest a bit, and we'll talk about other things when you're done." Lin Yang slept until evening. Lin Chuan woke him up to eat. He came to the separated room. Lin Yang saw 3 bowls of congee on the table at a glance. He thought that the mother and daughter had a tough life. Because Lin Chuan kept his head down, Lin Yang didn't see Lin Chuan's appearance clearly. It wasn't until he sat at the table that Lin Yang saw what Lin Chuan looked like and thought to himself, "Isn't this the Nguyen from the legend of Zhongyuan, Mao Xiaotong?" Although Lin Chuan's face is now waxy yellow and his body is thin, he doesn't look so beautiful, but his height is about 1.65 meters. As long as his nutrition keeps up, his figure and appearance are all first class. Lin Chuan's face was scorching from Lin Yang's gaze, and when he thought about his mother's thoughts, his shy little face was buried in his chest. Wang Xiuzhi saw her daughter's appearance and knew that she did not oppose the marriage. She coughed lightly and said, "Yangzi, can I call you that?" Lin Yang regained his composure and knew it was impolite to look at a girl like this. He blushed and said, "Cheng, why not? You can call her whatever you want." Upon hearing this, Wang Xiuzhi smiled slightly and explained the situation at home and her plans, saying, "Yangzi, what do you think?" Lin Yang didn't expect such a good thing. Although he didn't have to worry about not being able to survive in this era, no one wanted a stable life. Besides, in this era, having no income and spending money would be suspected. Moreover, he even gave away a beautiful woman for free. So he immediately said, "Mom, I should give up." Upon hearing this, Lin Chuan blushed and spat out, "Pooh, you're really shameless." P.S. In order to facilitate reading, the Chinese yuan does not include several sets, collectively referred to as the 3 sets. Chapter 2. Family Difficulties. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing Lin Chuan running inside, Lin Yang felt embarrassed to scratch his head. Wang Xiuzhi smiled and said, "Chuan has a thin skin. You should treat Chuan well in the future. Of course, if you find out that you are not suitable before getting married, this marriage is over." Lin Yang knew that Wang Xiuzhi was going to test his character and understood what others were worried about, so he said seriously, "Mom. Auntie, I'll listen to you all." Wang Xiuzhi nodded and smiled, "Okay, from now on we will be a family. You can call me Aunt Wang and live outside, but we don't have much interaction with the people in the courtyard. There are too many calculations in this courtyard." Lin Yang also knew that there were many trivial matters in the courtyard during this era, so he nodded and said, "Aunt Wang, I understand." After finishing their meal, there was no activity and it started snowing outside, so the 3 of them were also preparing to rest. Outside, Lin Chuan held a bed of bedding and handed it to Lin Yang, saying, "Brother Yangzi, give you the bedding." After putting down the bedding, he ran into the inside as if fleeing. Lin Yang picked up the bedding and smelled a faint scent, knowing that it must be Lin Chuan's, so he happily climbed into the bed and smelled the scent, thinking about his future path. Lin Yang is 18 years old, but his body looks only 16 years old. He understands that this is all caused by malnutrition in his childhood, but he is not without everything. In his past life, he obtained a cultivation method called the medicine immortal technique in a relic. This medicine immortal technique is not a simple cultivation method, but a relic of the cultivation civilization. Although it may not be considered a profound cultivation method for the cultivation civilization, it is not perfect for other civilizations. In his past life, Lin Yang reached the level of god of war through the medicine immortal technique. Later, in order to heal his girlfriend, he went to kill the fierce beast Dragon Emperor. However, as soon as he killed the Dragon Emperor, he was ambushed and seriously injured by other animal emperors. In a fit of rage, he swallowed all the extracted Dragon Emperor's essence and blood, self-destructing, and then his soul traveled back to the 1950s. As long as one's own martial arts are beginner's level, in this era of the end of the Dharma, they will still be carefree and carefree. Thinking of this, Lin Yang began to sit cross-legged, but as soon as he practiced, he realized that the spiritual energy in this world was very weak. However, before Lin Yang could recover, a surge of energy surged out of his soul. It took Lin Yang a full hour to open his eyes, with a burst of golden light in his eyes and his bones crackling all over. Lin Yang, who is now 1.78 meters tall, has twisted muscles and looks completely different from before. It turned out that the energy was left over from the essence and blood of the Dragon Emperor in his previous life. It was brought here by the soul, and successfully enabled the Lin Yang medical immortal technique to reach the completion of foundation building, and also had a trace of true dragon blood. Feeling the true essence in his body, Lin Yang really wanted to burst out laughing, but was afraid of waking up the mother and daughter in his dream, so he endured it. In the early morning, at the peak of a mountain forest outside the 49th city, a purple aura flew into Lin Yang's mouth, who was sitting cross-legged. Lin Yang slowly opened his eyes and muttered, "The innate purple aura in the early morning is not inferior to that in the end world. It seems that the problem of weak spiritual energy has been solved." Then, his figure transformed into a remnant and returned to the 49th city. Returning to the room, Lin Yang crawled into the bed and closed his eyes. In no time, Lin Churen's delicate figure came out of the room, looking at Lin Yang with his eyes closed. He walked lightly towards the kitchen. Lin Yang suddenly sat up, startled Lin Churen, and then glared at him angrily, whispering, "You scared me to death." Lin Yang got out of bed and smiled, "I woke up long ago. I'll help you make breakfast." He was about to enter the kitchen with Lin Churen. Lin Churen looked at Lin Yang in a daze and thought to himself, "Why does this person look different from yesterday?" When Lin Churen was stunned, Lin Yang shook his hand in front of Lin Churen and said, "Churen, what's wrong with you?" Lin Churen blushed and said, "It's nothing, you better go out. There's no reason for a man to enter the kitchen." Then he pushed Lin Yang out of the kitchen. Lin Yang returned to the outside, unsure of what to do. Wang Xiuji took out a set of clothes and handed them to Lin Yang, saying, "Yangzi, these are the clothes your uncle left behind before. Do you think they fit you? If they don't, I'll make some changes for you." Lin Yang took the clothes and smiled, "Okay, Aunt Wang." Wang Xiuji's husband's clothes were just right for Lin Yang to wear. Wang Xiuji looked at Lin Yang, who came out dressed, and smiled, "I thought it was a bit big, but I didn't expect it to be so suitable." Breakfast was very simple. 3 people each had a bowl of clear congee. Wang Xiuji said, "I'll see if I can get some odd jobs back later, or our family won't be able to open the pot." Then she looked sad. Lin Churen's situation was naturally known to Lin Yang, so he smiled and said, "Aunt Wang, I will go to the river with Churen to catch fish later. In our village, I am a skilled hunter. If it weren't for going to the city to find a job, I wouldn't be hungry." Upon hearing this, Wang Xiuji's eyes lit up and she said, "Really?" Lin Churen looked at Lin Yang with a pair of beautiful big eyes and said, "Let's go and try it later." Wang Xiuji then said, "Cheng, then you can go. I'm also busy going, but be careful not to fall into the ice cave." After speaking, she hurriedly left, and the situation at home cannot be delayed. After Wang Xiuji left, there were only Lin Churen and Lin Yang left in the room. The atmosphere was a bit awkward for a moment, but Lin Yang broke the awkwardness and said, "Churen, do we have a fishing rod at home?" Lin Churen nodded and said, "Yes, my dad used to love fishing." His eyes dimmed as he finished speaking. Lin Yang knew that Lin Churen's father was working in a steel rolling mill, but later died in an accident. He said it was due to an operational error, and there were no available positions at home. Otherwise, the Lin family would not have lived in such poverty. Therefore, he stepped forward and gently patted Lin Churen's hand, saying, "Don't worry, Churen. I will definitely take good care of you in the future, so that our father can rest assured in heaven." Lin Churen nodded at Lin Yang with red eyes, then withdrew his hand and angrily said, "Rogue." The young couple went out straight to Zhonghai with fishing rods and buckets, as they had already gone to work and had not encountered Yan Fugui. Arriving at a secluded place by the river, Lin Churen and Lin Yang began to smash the ice. After smashing the ice cave, Lin Yang released the pole. After half an hour without any movement, Lin Churen pouted and said, "Brother Yang, you're just bragging. I knew we wouldn't come on such a cold day." Lin Yang scraped Lin Churen's slightly red nose and said, "Why are you in a hurry? Fishing is just a delicate job, but it can't be rushed." Not far away, an old man saw the two of them playing around and shook his head with a smile, thinking to himself that this young man was in a relationship. How could he catch a fish like this? Then he settled on fishing and stopped paying attention to Lin Churen and Lin Yang. Lin Yang released his divine sense and searched for the big fish everywhere. Sure enough, he found a hibernating grass carp in the water, weighing about 7 or 8 pounds. Then, Zhongyuan wrapped the grass carp and pulled it closer, controlling the hook to hook it and then pulled it up. Lin Yang was originally bored, and coupled with the cold weather, he had already planned to go back. Just then, with a loud bang, Lin Yang caught a big grass carp weighing 7 or 8 pounds. Wow, what a big fish! At this moment, Lin Yang didn't feel cold anymore and happily ran over to help Lin Yang put the fish in the bucket. Lin Yang looked at Lin Yang's happiness and pinched his face, saying, "There will be more later. Today, let's improve our lives." Chapter 3. Improving Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lin Yang licked his lips at the words, but still held on to the big bucket and said, "Brother Yang, if we sell it, we can get a lot of money to buy food. You also know what's going on in our family." After speaking, he looked at Lin Yang cute, as if he would cry if he didn't agree. Lin Yang's expression of licking his lips made Lin Yang swallow his saliva. He knew it was the true dragon bloodline that was affecting him. After all, dragons are inherently lustful. Lin Yang came to his senses and rubbed Lin Yang's head with heartache, saying, "Yang, believe me, I will make sure you have a good life." Upon hearing these words, Lin Yang felt a warm feeling of wanting to cry. Since his father passed away, the people in the courtyard have been bullying their mother and daughter, so he has been feeling anxious and uneasy. At this moment, when he heard such caring words again, he felt sad and almost didn't shed tears. He forced himself to cry and nodded heavily, saying, "Brother Yang, I believe you." After finishing, he blushed and lowered his head. Lin Yang had the divine sense to cheat, and soon the fish in the bucket was filled. Lin Yang, like a protective dog, stared closely at the fish bucket, afraid that if one couldn't keep an eye on it, one would be missing. At this moment, nearby fish friends gathered around and an old man said, "Young man, do you sell this fish?" Lin Yang nodded and said, "It's for sale." "How many do you want, sir?" Lin Yang knew that there was no public-private partnership yet, so he allowed himself to do business. Moreover, even if there was a public-private partnership, this kind of self-fishing and selling was not considered speculative, so he did not stop Lin Yang. Quickly, Lin Yang sold all the fish in the bucket, about 60 pounds, for over 12 yuan. Then he grabbed the money and ran to Lin Yang's side excitedly, saying, "Brother Yang, we have money now, and we don't have to go hungry anymore." Although Lin Yang has suffered a lot, it has also made her mature enough to know that life is not easy. Seeing so much money now makes her excited. After all, she is only 16 years old and still a half-year-old child. Seeing Lin Yang so happy, Lin Yang sighed inwardly and didn't know what days she had lived before. So he smiled and said, "Yang, you sold all the fish. What should we eat tonight?" Lin Yang regained his senses and spat out his small tongue to please him, saying, "I forgot about Yang Zige. Besides, Yang Zige has such skills, how many more fish can he catch easily?" Upon hearing this, Lin Yang burst out laughing and rubbed Lin Yang's head, saying with a smile, "Okay, then let's catch a few more." After that, he threw the bait into the ice cave again. Lin Yang stood on the side, squinting her eyes as she watched Lin Yang fishing. She was not bothered by Lin Yang's intimate movements at all, but rather had some enjoyment. Lin Yang used his divine sense to cheat. Of course, it would be windy or rainy. After another hour, the fish bucket was filled again, and Lin Yang was excited and jumping like a child. Lin Yang didn't finish work until noon and said, "All right, let's go home, otherwise Aunt Wang should be anxious." Although Lin Yang was a bit reluctant, he nodded and said, "All right, Yang Zige, let's come back tomorrow so that we can have a good new year." Lin Yang knew that everyone in the courtyard was watching the Lin family's jokes. When the Lin family couldn't resist returning to the village, he bought the Lin family's house at an extremely low price. "Today I received over 30 yuan and a grass carp weighing 5 or 6 pounds. Lin Chuan circled around Lin Yang happily like a child, chattering incessantly. This is what she should look like at her age. The two of them returned to Nanluoga Lane and first went to a grocery store to buy some seasonings. Making fish without seasoning was not delicious, and now most families boil it in water, which is very tasteless. Lin Chuan held Lin Yang's arm, eating big white rabbit milk candy in her mouth, with a satisfied smile on her small face. She remembered the last time she ate big white rabbit milk candy was when her father was alive. Returning to the entrance of the courtyard, Lin Chuan saw Aunt San and greeted her, "Hello Aunt San." Aunt San looked at Lin Yang and asked, "Chu Ran, is this the relative who came to your house yesterday?" Lin Yang was momentarily stunned when he saw Aunt San. Isn't this Aunt San from watching TV dramas with her mother in her past life? If we had to say that this TV drama was still watched with my mother back then, there were so many strange things in it that I didn't expect to travel to a world full of love in a courtyard house. Aunt San looked at the bucket in Lin Yang's hand and walked back and forth to see a big grass carp weighing 5 or 6 pounds. She envied and said, "What a big fish, you are so lucky today." Before he could finish speaking, Lin Chuan interrupted, "Aunt San, let's go back first." After that, he pulled Lin Yang into his own house. Upon seeing the young couple enter the room, Aunt San immediately swallowed the remaining words back into her stomach. At this moment, Lin Yang realized that the Lin family actually lived next door to Yanfugui. He thought that if he didn't cross over and happened to be rescued by Wang Xiuji, the mother and daughter would eventually return to the countryside. The house should have been bought by Yanfugui and later became the marriage home for Yan Jiafang and Yu Li. As soon as he entered the room, Lin Chuan ran up to Wang Xiuji and boasted, "Mom, Brother Yang is really amazing. We don't have to go hungry anymore." After finishing, he put all the money in his pocket on the table. Wang Xiuji couldn't find a job again this morning, and her face was full of sorrow. Now that she saw Lin Chuan leaving a pile of change on the table, she was taken aback. It was estimated that there would be at least 20 coins, and she was immediately surprised and said, "Chuan, where do you get this money from? You should know that a regular worker only earns around 20 yuan a month now, and how could Wang Xiuji not ask with all this sudden money?" Lin Chuan naturally knew what his mother was worried about, so he quickly hugged Wang Xiuji's arm and said, "Mom, Dong Zaij is really good at fishing. This is the money he sold for fishing today, which is over 30 yuan. We will go tomorrow, so not only will we not be hungry, but we can also have a good new year this year." Wang Xiuji couldn't believe her ears. She thought to herself that fishing can catch so much. "You wouldn't lie to me, would you?" Next door Yanfugui also often goes fishing, but the harvest is not very good. He occasionally sells some money to support his family, so he looks at Lin Yang. Lin Yang smiled slightly and said, "Aunt Wang, didn't I say I'm very good at fishing and hunting? Don't worry, with me, our family will definitely have a better life in the future." Wang Xiuji didn't expect the son-in-law she picked up to be so talented. It seems that God has long eyes and won't let them go back to the countryside. Therefore, her eyes were moist and she said happily, okay, believe me, this house will be left to you in the future." Then he pushed the money in front of Lin Yang and said, "Yangzi, take the money and you will make the decision at home." Lin Yang collected the money and took out 10 yuan to put on his body. He handed the remaining money to Lin Chuan and said, "Chuan, from now on, you can manage the money in our family." Lin Chuan blushed and took the money, feeling extremely sweet in his heart. Wang Xiuji saw that the young couple had a good relationship and naturally felt happy in her heart. She smiled and said, "There happened to be fish. Mom went and cooked the fish. We had meat at home at noon." Upon hearing this, Lin Chuan's eyes lit up. However, she hadn't eaten any meat for a long time, so she bounced up to Wang Xiuji and said, "Mom, I'll help you." Lin Yang grabbed Wang Xiuji's mother and daughter and said, "Aunt Wang, let me do it. I'm also good at cooking, so you and Chu Ran can taste my craft." After that, Wang Shouji came to the kitchen and killed the fish. Seeing that Lin Yang was skilled, Wang Shouji left with confidence. After killing the fish, Lin Yang said to Lin Churen, "At first, we should have pickled Chinese cabbage in our house, right?" Lin Churen nodded and said, "Yes, I'll go get it for you right away." After finishing speaking, he ran towards the cellar. After Lin Churen left, Lin Yang asked, "Aunt Wang, what is the situation with the three masters next door?" Wang Shouji thought about it and said, "His family's man's name is Yan Fugui. He is the third eldest son in the courtyard and works as a teacher at Hongqing Elementary School. There are 5 people living in one room of the family, and their livelihood depends solely on the salary of the third eldest son. It's not easy, but his family loves to be calculating. You must be careful in the future, otherwise you might accidentally be counted." Upon hearing this, Lin Yang knew that his house should eventually fall into the hands of Yan Fugui, but it was unclear how much he spent on it. However, now that he has traveled through it, Yan Fugui should not worry about it. At this time, Lin Churen in with pickled Chinese cabbage and said, "Brother Yang, here comes pickled Chinese cabbage. What fish are you going to make?" Lin Yang doted on her little nose and said with a smile, "You just love me." Chapter 4. First Encounter of Zhonghai. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lin Yang plans to make pickled Chinese cabbage fish, which is a good dish for dinner. With Lin Churen's help, the smell of fish soon spreads all over the front yard. The 3 aunts smack their mouths and wonder, when did Wang Shouji have this skill? On the side, Yan Jiqing was still a 15-year-old child and said, "Mom, it smells so good. When will our family be able to make such fish?" Yan Jifang and the still runny Yan Jiquang nodded and said, "Yes, Mom, the fish cooked by Aunt Wang's family is so delicious." Aunt Yang Ruihua glared at the 3 children angrily and said, "What kind of fish to eat? Our family relies solely on your father's salary to make a living. It's good to be able to eat enough. Don't look at her family's good luck, I don't know how to live in the future. Hurry up and eat." The 3 brothers were scolded by Aunt San and didn't dare to speak too much. They immediately lowered their heads to eat, but their noses kept sucking, so they could eat more steamed buns with the fish flavor. In the middle courtyard, Jia Zhang was eating steamed buns alone when he smelled the fragrance of fish and cursed, "What kind of immoral thing is this? I don't even know how to help my family with making fish. It's really heartless." In the front yard, Lin Yang placed a large bowl of fish on the table and said with a smile, "Mom, Churen, you guys should eat first. I'll throw the fish in the kitchen, otherwise it's too smelly." He was about to leave. Lin Churen stopped and said, "Brother Yang, didn't you stew those together?" Lin Yang was puzzled and said, "Those things cannot be eaten, of course they were thrown away." Upon hearing this, Lin Churen glared at Lin Yang and said, "Brother Yang, you are really a loser. Those are all meat, who said you can't eat them?" Wang Shouji nodded in agreement, and Lin Yang finally remembered what era it was now. He scratched his head and said, "Aunt Wang, I didn't eat these before. Besides, we won't lack meat in the future, so let's just throw them away." Lin Churen thought about it and said, "All right, since you don't want to eat, then give it to someone else. Grandma Zhang used to borrow our food, so I'll go deliver it now." After saying it, he ran to the kitchen. Wang Shouji sighed and said, "Grandma Zhang's family is not easy either. Her son and daughter-in-law have long been dependent on her grandson, but fortunately, there is still a subsidy that we can barely afford. A while ago, our family couldn't afford it. The people in the courtyard had a small plan, and no one would lend us food. They couldn't hide that plan from me, but our family couldn't do anything about it. In the end, Grandma Zhang couldn't bear it and borrowed 5 pounds of stick noodles. That's how we persevered." Wang Shouji sighed and continued, "I originally thought that if it really didn't work out, I would take Churen back to my mother's house to live and sell this house to Yan Fugui. Now that it's okay, I can rest assured with you at my mother's house. At this moment, Lin Yang also understood why Lin Chuan did not appear in the original drama. How could a beautiful woman like Lin Chuan not have been introduced? She probably couldn't survive and went back to the countryside to sell her house to Yan Fugui. But in this way, without a house, can Yan Jicheng and Yu Li still get married smoothly? However, none of this had anything to do with him. Seeing Wang Xiuji feeling a bit sad at the moment, he comforted her and said, "Aunt Wang, things are all over. Our family's good days are still ahead." "What's a good day?" Lin Chuan ran in with great enthusiasm. Wang Xiuji looked at her daughter and then at Lin Yang's relieved expression, and immediately said, "Let's have dinner." Lin Chuan had been craving for food for a long time, so he didn't ask anymore. He picked up a steamed bun and took a bite, then picked up a piece of fish and put it in his mouth. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed and he said, "This time, it's really delicious." Lin Yang saw Lin Chuan eating happily and picked up a large piece of fish belly meat and put it into her bowl, saying, "It's delicious, just eat more in the pot." Lin Chuan kept chewing and nodding while bulging her small mouth. Wang Xiuji tapped her daughter's head with chopsticks and said, "This big girl doesn't have a good appetite. From now on, Yang Zi doesn't want you. I'll see what you do." Lin Chuan stopped chewing and couldn't help but look at Lin Yang, as if he cried when he said he didn't want her. Lin Yang saw Lin Chuan's childishness and rubbed her hair, saying, "Yes, my family is so cute and beautiful. How could I possibly not want it?" Lin Chuan chewed again, but his eyes were already smiling like crescent moon, and he even gave Wang Xiuji a provocative look. Wang Xiuji almost lost her anger and smiled, poking Lin Chuan's forehead and cursing, "Are you too brave?" Lin Chuan swallowed the food in his mouth, stuck out his tongue at Wang Xiuji, and then lowered his head to continue cooking. After a meal, both Mrs. Wang Xiuji and Mrs. Wang were propped up, leaning against chairs to digest their food. Lin Yang had no choice but to tidy up the table himself. Lin Chuan stood up with a red face and wanted help, but was stopped by Lin Yang. Seeing Lin Yang enter the kitchen, Wang Xiuji looked at Lin Chuan and sighed, "Chuan, you have good luck. When you meet someone like Lin Yang, you must be good to him in the future and not play with a child's temper." Lin Chuan lowered his head and nodded shyly, "Mom, I know." In the afternoon, Zhonghai returned from work and heard Auntie say that the Lin family had eaten fish. She frowned and said, "I'll go see the Lin family." After saying that, she left the room. The Lin family in the front yard. Lin Yangjing and Lin Chuan said they would continue fishing tomorrow when they saw the door pushed open and a middle-aged man walked in, who was none other than Zhonghai. Lin Yang frowned and said, "Who are you? Why don't you knock on the door when you enter the house? Don't you know that there are all female relatives at home?" Zhonghai didn't expect to be questioned, but what Lin Yang said was not wrong. He didn't have any reason to get angry, so he awkwardly said, "I didn't expect that." Lin Yang didn't get used to him and said coldly, "Remember to knock on the door when you enter the house in the future." Wang Xiuji chuckled inwardly, but still approached and introduced, "Yangzi, this is the first master in the courtyard." Then he turned his head and said, "Grandpa Yi, what's up with you coming to my house?" Zhonghai finally regained his senses and asked in a deep voice, "Wang Xiuji, who is this? You also know that as the first master, I always have to inquire about the next generation in the yard." Wang Xiuji didn't hesitate and said directly, "Grandpa Yi, this is my son.in.law. My parents have both passed away and we can't live, so he came to me. After 2 years, he will arrange their marriage." Upon hearing this, Zhonghai was taken aback. He hadn't heard that Lin Chuan still had an engagement, but these were not things he could ask. He nodded and said, "Since it's your son.in.law, I won't say anything. However, I still need to go to the street to report it, so as not to cause trouble in the hospital in the future." Wang Xiuji said expressionlessly, "I will go to the street to report. Is there anything else you need, Mr. E?" Zhonghai saw Wang Shouji seeing off the guests and snorted coldly, "It's gone." He then left the house. Lin Chuan said calmly, "What does Grandpa Yi mean?" "It's like my Yang Zige is a bad person." Wang Shouji gave Lin Chuan a pale glance and said, "He's not here to make fun of us. Our family has always been tough, and this time he's adding another word. He wishes we couldn't hold on and go back to the village early, so he can help his disciple Jia Dongshu get our house. Jia Dongshu is also at the age of marriage, and if he doesn't have a house, he can only find someone from the village. But he also looks down on me too much, Wang Shouji. Even if we go back to the countryside, I would rather sell the house to Yan Fugue than to this cunning person." Chapter 5. Zhongyuan Pool. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Lin Yang finally understood why the house ended up in the hands of Yan Fugue. It seemed that his mother.in.law was still jealous of evil, so Jia Dongshu finally found a rural daughter.in.law, who later became the White Lotus Qinhuai. It is said that Qinhuai is right. She is a good daughter.in.law and mother, but when we think about it carefully, if we can count others as extinct for our own family, we can imagine how ruthless her heart is and how kind she is to her. Can she be considered a good person? Not to mention that Qinhuai was also forced to do nothing about it. If she were really a good person, she wouldn't let silly Zhu lead a gang. With her salary of 27.5 yuan, after 3 years of natural disasters, she could have made silly Zhu marry or even marry him. But she didn't have it. Instead, she was worried about silly Zhu's several houses and salary, which were not for her own children. So, let alone Qinhuai, who is a good person, is just like being forced. Personality is innate and cannot be changed. Just rely on Qinhuai to make silly Zhu go bankrupt for money. She is not a good person, but this person has a deep inner world and is good at hiding herself. Alright, let's get back to the point. After Zhonghai left, Lin Yang said, "Aunt Wang, let's close the door and live our lives. Just don't deal with the people in the courtyard. I heard you say there aren't many good people in the courtyard." Lin Chuan took the conversation and said, "Brother Yang, my family doesn't have much contact with the people in the courtyard, and since I live in the front yard, I don't know much about the neighbors in the backyard and middle yard. So we're not very clear about the specifics, but there shouldn't be many good people. In the future, we'll listen to you. Let's close the door and live our lives, not participate in the things that happen in the courtyard." Wang Shouji also nodded and said, "In the future, you will be the head of the family, and we will listen to you whatever you want to do." Lin Yang scratched his head and said, "How can this work? I'm still young and don't quite understand these things. If there's anything, let's discuss it with everyone." Wang Shouji smiled and said, "If you marry Chu Ran in the future, you will be the only man in the family. Of course, you will be the one in charge of any family matters." The reason why Wang Shouji said this is twofold. Firstly, there is really nothing at home. Secondly, she spends 2 days together and thinks that this child is really good. Even if she discovers problems in the future, isn't she still unmarried? Moreover, the change in family life now is not all due to Lin Yang. The next morning. "Yang Zige, wake up." Lin Yang felt a tickling sensation in his nose. When he opened his eyes, he saw that it was Lin Chuan, the little girl who was teasing him with her hair. Her delicate appearance made Lin Yang itch in his heart. He grabbed the little girl and immediately kissed her. After a while, Lin Yang finally let go of Lin Chuan. Lin Chuan blushed and glanced at Lin Yang, saying, "Hooligan." Then he ran out to the kitchen. Lin Yang touched his lips and chuckled. A carp jumped out of bed, carrying the toiletries he bought yesterday. Middle courtyard, pool. A disheveled young man is washing up, looking like a 16-year-old fool, but he must be in his 20s. Silly Zhu spat out the water from his mouth and looked at Lin Yang, asking, "Are you the son.in.law of Aunt Wang's family, who is Lin Chuan's object?" Lin Yang glanced at the silly pillar and nodded, yes, what's up with you? Silly Zhu grinned and said, my name is Heyuzhu, and they all call me Silly Zhu. You can call me Silly Zhu. As the saying goes, don't hit the smiling person with your hand. Lin Yang politely shook hands with Silly Zhu and said, my name is Lin Yang, just call me Yangzi. Silly Zhu scratched his head and said, okay, let's have a few drinks when Yangzi has time. Now Silly Zhu has just joined the steel rolling mill as an apprentice, earning 18 yuan a month. In addition, he can bring some leftover food in the kitchen, so he can still get by with Rainwater. Lin Yang smiled and said, alright, when I get some meat, you can take a spoonful and let's have some, while also trying your craft. Silly Zhu nodded with a smile and said, alright, then you can have a good look. Our craftsmanship is also worth it in the 4 or 9 cities. As he was speaking, Lin Chern ran to the pool and handed over a towel, saying, Brother Yang, you forgot the towel. Silly Zhu smiled and said, oh, you're worried about the little lover. Lin Chern glared at Silly Zhu and spat, pooh, a dog can't spit out ivory from its mouth. She and Silly Dwelling are also considered peers, so naturally they are familiar, but after speaking, they still ran away with a red face. Silly Zhu envied and said, Yangzi, I didn't expect you to pick a flower in our yard. If it weren't for Lin Chern's engagement to your child, I would have had to argue with you. Lin Yang was not angry with Silly Zhu's words, but instead smiled proudly and said, you won't have a chance with that pillar. At this moment, a well-proportioned man walked over, but looking at Lin Chern's back, he felt a bit dazed. He also knew that he and Lin Chern were impossible. He was already 22 years old, and Lin Chern was only 16 years old. Dongshu, here you are. Let me introduce you to you. This is Lin Yang, the son-in-law of Aunt Wang, who will also live in our courtyard in the future. Silly Zhu introduced with a smile. Jia Dongshu looked at Lin Yang and said with a smile, hello, my name is Jia Dongshu and I live in the middle courtyard. If you need any help in the future, please let me know and I will definitely help you. Upon hearing this, Lin Yang curled his lips and thought to himself, you have to spend your salary alone. When the Lin family's mother and daughter couldn't survive, I didn't see you reaching out to help. At this moment, you came to offer a cheap offer. It was really right for the dog to lift the curtain. Moreover, Jia Dongshu's gaze at Lin Chern just now made Lin Yang very unhappy. Therefore, he said in a low voice, no need, I naturally have the man in charge of my family's affairs, so I won't bother Jia Gu anymore. After saying this, he turned around and went home. After Lin Yang left, Jia Dongshu spat on the ground and said, what kind of thing? It's just something I don't understand. Silly Zhu scratched his head and said, Brother Dongshu, Yangzi and you are not yet familiar, so don't worry too much. Jia Dongshu sneered at the words and said, can I have the same understanding as him? A family that can't even eat enough doesn't know where his confidence comes from, but that firewood girl Lin Chern has grown up. However, what Jia Dongshu didn't know was that when Lin Chern's nutrition caught up, it would be the complete explosion of Qinhuai. Su Dumao didn't wake up so early because he was still in high school and would only graduate next year, so he got out of sync with Lin Yang. When Lin Yang returned home, breakfast had been set on the table. The pickled Chinese cabbage fish left yesterday, together with a few steamed buns and a pot of porridge, was the breakfast that Lin Chern's mother and daughter had dared not think of before. Because Lin Yang had brought more than 30 yuan, Wang Shouji dared to eat like this. After the three of them finished breakfast beautifully, Lin Yang said to Wang Shouji, Aunt Wang, don't go out today. Chu Ran and I will go fishing and won't come back at noon. You can make some food at home by yourself. Wang Shouji naturally agreed with a smile, reminding the two of them to be careful of the slippery ice. Watching the young couple go out with their backs, Wang Shouji's heart was full of enthusiasm and hope for the future. Lin Yang and Lin Chern arrived at Zhonghai, randomly found an ice cave to break open, and began fishing. After a short time, they caught nearly 100 pounds and sold them for 25 yuan. They went out to a restaurant at noon. Although Lin Yang was heartbroken about money, he never stopped eating, which was a source of joy. After finishing their meal, the two of them came to the ice again. In the afternoon, they fished for more than 200 pounds and coincidentally encountered a restaurant purchaser who had collected all the fish. Lin Yang, who was also saving time, went to the market to sell the fish. Over 300 pounds, sold for over 70 yuan, and spent 1.6 cents on lunch. Today, Lin Yang had a big harvest. His happy face was full of smiles, from being unable to cook at home to having 100 yuan in savings. The little girl couldn't help but be excited. Looking at Lin Yang beside her, Lin Yang felt full of expectations and a sense of security for the future. Chapter 6. He Rainwater. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At first, let's go to the market to buy some meat, and I will cook braised pork belly for you in the evening, okay? Lin Yang excitedly hugged Lin Yang's arm and jumped up to kiss him, then spread out Lin Yang and ran forward. Lin Yang laughed and chased after him. In a moment of chaos, Lin Yang arrived at the vegetable market. He bought 5 pounds of high-quality pork belly and 20 pounds of white noodles from a grain shop. On the way home, Lin Yang was a bit confused. Are these things she could eat? Then he touched the more than 70 yuan she had placed close to her, and finally came to her home with money. Seeing Lin Yang in a daze, Lin Yang asked, "What's wrong with you, Yang?" Lin Yang sighed and said, "Brother Yang, this is all true. I'm not dreaming." Lin Yang chuckled and stuffed a piece of big white rabbit milk candy into Lin Yang's mouth, asking, "Yang, is it sweet?" Lin Yang was taken aback and then smiled, "Of course it's sweet." Lin Yang scraped her small nose and said, "Sweetness is not just a dream. Don't worry, with me, our life will get better and better in the future. When we finish fishing tomorrow, we will add some clothes for you and Aunt Wang. Otherwise, this winter will not be easy." Lin Yang nodded happily, then took out a piece of big white rabbit milk candy and said to Lin Yang, "Brother Yang, you can eat it too." Lin Yang looked around and said with a wicked smile, "Chu Ran, I want to eat what's in your mouth." Upon hearing this, Lin Yang's face turned hot. He secretly looked around and quickly kissed anyone, then lowered his head and remained silent. Lin Yang said happily, "My wife's candy is still delicious." Lin Yang felt his ears turn red and stomped his feet angrily, saying, "Brother Yang, you have died. Who is your wife?" He then ran forward. Lin Yang laughed heartily and chased after him, carrying something. The young couple quickly returned to the courtyard while frolicking. Because he returned early, Yan Fugue had not finished school yet, and the young couple returned to their own home smoothly. However, the gatekeeper, Aunt San, was still impressed and thought to herself that the Lin family couldn't do anything like this. Returning home, Wang Xiuji looked at Lin Yang's things in surprise and said, "Chu Ran, did you rob the supply and marketing cooperative?" Lin Yang hugged Wang Xiuji's arm and said, "Mom, whatever you're saying, it's all bought by me in Yang Zige, not for grabbing." After finishing speaking, he took out the money he had kept close to him and said, "Mom, look, this is the money that Yang Zige earns in a day, over 70 yuan. Wang Xiuji widened her eyes and asked, "How much?" "In the 70s, my goodness, are you picking fish?" Lin Yang was shocked when he saw Wang Xiuji's face and smiled proudly, "Mom, you don't know how powerful Yang Zige is. Fishing people call him the fishing god. Today, we caught over 300 pounds of fish in less than a day and sold them all." Wang Xiuji regained her senses and advised Lin Yang, "You can put the money away and don't lose it." Lin Yang nodded and said, "Mom, don't worry, I know Jia Zhang's hands and feet are not clean, I will definitely hide them." Lin Yang smiled and said, "What are you hiding? Take some money with your mother alone, and I'll help you hide the rest. I promise no one will find it." Lin Yang thought about it and said, "Okay." Then he gave Wang Xiuji 20 kept 20 for himself, and gave the rest to Lin Yang. Lin Yang took the money and put it in his pocket. In fact, it was put into the storage ring that was refined yesterday. Due to the material, the storage ring was only 3 cubic meters in size, but it was enough to put some things. Lin Chuan tilted his head to look at Lin Yang curiously and asked, "Aren't you hiding money? Why don't you hide it?" Lin Yang smiled and said, "It's already hidden." Lin Chuan naturally didn't believe it and pouted, who wouldn't know how to hide it. "Really, I thought you had a good place to hide money." Lin Yang saw that Lin Chuan didn't believe it and smiled, "Then come and find it. If you find it, I will promise you one condition." Lin Chuan's eyes turned and he said, "Really, anything will do." Lin Yang nodded and smiled, "That's nature." Lin Chuan reached out and took it out of Lin Yang's pocket, but after searching for a long time, he found nothing. Lin Chuan, who didn't believe in evil, almost searched Lin Yang's entire body. Wang Xiuji didn't look at it and cursed directly, "You damn girl, you're going to die." Lin Chuan also felt that he was flipping over something wrong. He blushed and said hard, "Yang Zige is my future husband, why can't I flip over?" Although the voice was low, it was still heard by Lin Yang, so he whispered in Lin Chuan's ear, "Yes, you can flip anywhere." Wang Xiuji took a mouthful of dog food, rolled her eyes, and went to the kitchen to pick up the meat. Lin Chuan blushed and twisted his face, saying, "Brother Yang, what are you talking about? Let mom see if it's a joke." Lin Yang held Lin Chuan in his arms and said, "Don't worry, our mother isn't happy yet." Lin Chuan broke free from his embrace and spat, "Pooh, my mom said she can't give it to you until she's married, otherwise I'll be a bad woman." Lin Yang chuckled and whispered something in Lin Chuan's ear, causing him to blush and nod, then bury his face in Lin Yang's arms. In the evening, Lin Yang cooked in person and stewed a large pot of braised pork belly. The smell of the meat filled the whole courtyard, making many neighbors drool. Just as the Lin family was enjoying their meal, a small figure stood at the door and knocked. Lin Chuan stood up and went to open the door. He heard Lin Chuan say, "Rainwater, why are you here? It's cool outside and come in to talk." Lin Yang saw Lin Chuan leading a little girl around 6 or 7 years old in. Wang Xiuji also felt sorry for this little girl who was left behind by her father. Before, she couldn't eat enough at home, so there was no surplus food to help her. Now that she had Lin Yang at home, she pulled Rainwater in and asked her in a chair, "Has Rainwater eaten?" Rainwater looked at braised pork belly and white flour mantou on the table, and couldn't help licking his lips. "Aunt Wang, my brother hasn't come back yet, and I feel very hungry. I went to both the deaf old lady and an uncle's house. They didn't have food, so I came to Aunt Wang's house. I can't eat much. Aunt Wang can give me a meatball. When my brother comes back, I'll let him give you back." Lin Chuan handed Rainy a mantou and said, "Eat first and talk later." Then he handed Rainy a pair of chopsticks. Rainy was so moved that she almost cried. She was so hungry and panicked that she walked around the yard and didn't want to arrive. The Lin family couldn't come until now. Although she knew that it was not easy for the Lin family, she didn't expect to eat so well. She was still in a trance for a while. She said, "Sister Chuan, I can only eat mantou." Lin Chuan picked up a piece of meat and put it into Rainwater's mouth. The little girl couldn't help but chew it, and the fragrant meat in her mouth made her want to cry. It's been a long time since Daching ran away that she hasn't eaten meat. Every time the silly guy brought some good things, he gave them to the deaf old lady in the backyard, but she didn't care if she went hungry. Looking at the red-eyed Rainwater, Wang Xiuji's soft heart was touched and she whispered, "Eat the rain quickly. When you were still growing up, you couldn't be hungry." Rainwater ate while shedding tears, and Lin Yang shook his head as he watched. This silly pillar is messy enough, and even his own sister can't take good care of it. Chapter 7. Elaborate on the situation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's not that silly Zhu doesn't care about the younger sister he Rainwater, it's just that his heart is too big to take it seriously, which led to little Rainwater going hungry. In addition, Zhonghai's actions are not authentic, his mouth is full of righteousness and morality, but he doesn't do anything practical, except for the Jia family's affairs. The deaf old lady only recognizes the foolish pillar, as for the water splashed out by he Rainwater, that's all. He Rainy still can't let go. He stopped after eating a mantu. Lin Yang felt sorry for him, so he picked up a mantu and put some pieces of braised pork belly in brown sauce on it. He said with a smile, "Don't be polite to her. Since you have eaten all the rain, you should be full. Don't be polite to your brothers and sisters." Yushui took the mantu with a red face and whispered, "Thank you, brother Yangzi." Wang Xiuji saw all of this in her eyes and felt even more satisfied with Lin Yang in her heart. If she could develop sympathy for a strange little girl, she would definitely not be wrong with her own mother in the future. At this moment, Lin Chuan gently gave Lin Yang meat, with a happy smile on her face. It was all thanks to her Yangzi brother that the family could eat so well. Silly Zhu came back and didn't see his sister he Rainwater. He quickly searched in the yard, but neither Mr. One's family nor the deaf old lady saw he Rainwater. At this moment, he was a bit anxious and went to the front yard to ask Mr. 3 if he saw his sister go out. As we walked to the door of Uncle San's house, we heard the laughter of our sister he Rainwater coming from the Lin family. Knocking on the door and entering, I saw he Rainwater holding his stomach and leaning against the chair mountain, chatting and laughing with Lin Chuan, with an expression of overeating. He Rainwater, who was speaking with Lin Chuan, saw silly Zhu come in and ignored him with a single glance. Lin Yang smiled and said, "Pillar, you came back late. When you first saw the rain and didn't eat, you called over to have some at my house." Silly Zhu scratched his head and said, "Aunt Wang, Yangzi, I'm causing trouble for you." Then he said to Yushui, "Rainwater, why don't you go to Mr. Yi's house or the old lady's house to eat when you're hungry? Why bother Aunt Wang? You don't know Aunt Wang's house is not easy." Silly Column was stunned when he finished his words. The braised pork belly in brown sauce in the room was too delicious. He saw the food on the table and thought that when did the Lins eat so well, they could not open the pot. He Rainwater glared at the silly pillar and said, "You think I didn't go, but both Mr. E and the old lady said they didn't have anything to eat. What can I do? Besides, I'm so hungry. If it weren't for Sister Chuan, your sister would have starved to death long ago." Silly Zhu scratched his head awkwardly upon hearing this and said, "Isn't there a hospitality here?" Wang Xiuji tried to smooth things out and said, "Okay, Rainwater, your brother's work is important. If your brother doesn't come back in the future, if you're hungry, come to Aunt Wang's house to eat." He Rainwater smiled sweetly at Wang Xiuji and said, "Thank you, Aunt Wang." He Rainwater has never had a mother's love since he was so old, coupled with Wang Xiuji's inherent kindness and sincere love for him, making him feel like he has never had before, just like a mother. After the rain left, Wang Xiuji sighed and said, "Rainwater, this girl will have a difficult life in the future." Wang Xiuji understood the things in the courtyard, and sooner or later, the silly pillar was fooled by Zhonghai. Lin Chuan asked in confusion, "Mom, why do you say that? Silly Zhu's salary is getting higher and higher in the future, how can he still live a difficult life in the rain? These are the only two people in the He family." Wang Xiuji glanced at Lin Chuan and said, "Don't inquire blindly about your child's home." Lin Chuan's small mouth suddenly became angry, and he turned his face away from Wang Xiuji. Lin Yang smiled and said, "Mom, you can tell me. I will also live in the courtyard in the future. It's also good to learn more." Wang Xiuji looked at Lin Yang and then at Lin Chuan, laughing and saying, "You spoil Chuan so much, be careful not to spoil her in the future." Lin Yang looked at Lin Chuan and smiled, "Of course, my own daughter.in.law is in pain. As for spoiling her, it's impossible. Chuan is such a good girl, and I believe she will always maintain her kindness." Lin Churen's heart was filled with joy upon hearing this, and he looked proudly at Wang Xiuji with his head held high. Wang Xiuji angrily poked her in the cerebellum and said, "Okay, I'll just talk about things in the yard, and Yang Zi should listen more." Lin Yang nodded and said, "Aunt Wang, you tell me, I will definitely listen carefully." Lin Churen, who was sitting beside him, was also listening attentively. Wang Xiuji organized some language and said, "First of all, let's talk about 3 grandfathers. Besides having a bottom line in calculations, the 3rd grandmaster is also someone who is too stingy, but actually has no major problems. The 2nd grandmaster is brainless, always being used as a gun, and is a fan of officials. He can do anything to become an official. The 1st grandmaster is too sophisticated, and he always wants to find an elderly person without children. Now, he has chosen Jia Dongxiu from the Jia family, so he always leans towards the Jia family in some matters. As for the silly pillar, he may be raised as a spare tire, and the Jia family is a non-nest. Remember not to provoke them as much as possible." Lin Churen didn't understand and said, "Mom, what does this have to do with living a difficult life after the rain?" Wang Xiuji glanced at her daughter and said, "Chu Ran, let me ask you, is life easy for the Jia family?" Lin Churen thought about it and said, "Jia Dongxiu's salary is 33 yuan. Although Jia Zhang has a rural household registration, shouldn't life be difficult?" Lin Yang smiled at the words and continued, "Chu Ran, the reason why the Jia family can still live well now is because Jia Dongxiu has not married a wife. When Jia Dongxiu marries a wife, if he has 3 or 2 children, do you think their family can still have a good life?" Lin Yang has one more thing to say, which is that in the future, the era of bills will be implemented, and the Jia family will truly face difficulties. Lin Churen still didn't understand and urgently asked, "Even if Jia Dongxiu gets married, they will still work together and their lives can only get better and better. How could they be sad?" Wang Xiuji glanced at the silly girl and said, "Based on what you said, we need to find a city girl. But take a look at the Jia family's house and see which girl will marry in. Otherwise, Zhonghai won't help the Jia family think about our house. So if Jia Dongxiu doesn't have a house, he will have to marry a rural girl in the future." Lin Churen suddenly thought of Jia Dongxiu marrying a rural girl, constantly having children, and finally relying on Jia Dongxiu's salary to make a living. Those days were terrifying to think of. At this moment, as Lin Yang was thinking about his abilities, Lin Churen felt lucky to have met him, and a hint of happiness couldn't help but flow in his eyes. Lin Yang naturally saw Lin Churen's expression, so he blinked at him. Lin Churen immediately blushed and lowered his head, muttering softly, "Stinky thug." Wang Xiuji stared and said, "You too, be careful, I'm still here." Upon hearing this, Lin Churen felt his face burning hot. He hugged Wang Xiuji's arm and coquettishly said, "Mom." Wang Xiuji poked her head and said, "Do you still listen?" Lin Churen immediately straightened his posture and said, "Listen." Wang Xiuji continued, "In the future, Jia Dongxiu will have a good life and nothing will happen. But the situation of the Jia family is there, and he is not young anymore. So I am certain that Jia Dongxiu will marry a rural girl. When the Jia family's life is difficult, Zhonghai will let Silly Zhu help." Originally, Silly Zhu helped the deaf old lady, and with the addition of the Jia family, can the rainy days be easier? Lin Churen stood up incredulously and said, "It's impossible. Although Zhonghai is bad, his monthly salary of 70.80 is so high that he can't let Silly Zhu help him. Then Jia Dongxiu is his disciple." Chapter 8. Qinhuai Ruchu's admission to the hospital. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wang Xiuji sighed and said, "Chu Ran, have you seen Zhonghai help anyone in the courtyard?" "Of course, except for the Jia family and the deaf old lady." Upon careful consideration, Lin Churen realized that Zhonghai was helping the Jia family and the deaf old lady in the courtyard. Of course, he also turned to the foolish pillar when he had something to do. Now, upon closer examination, Zhonghai appeared to be doing a great job. Lin Yang secretly thought to himself, you don't know that Jia Dongshu is short-lived. After Jia Dongshu's death, that will be the real hardship of Rainwater. Wang Shouji saw Lin Chuan lost in thought and smiled, alright, that's all for today. Let's live our lives behind closed doors in the future, with less involvement in hospital affairs. Mom is waiting for you two to get married, so she can have a grandchild hug for her. Upon hearing this, Lin Chuan blushed and stood up angrily, saying, I'm ignoring you. After finishing speaking, he quickly ran towards the inside. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 29th day of the 12th lunar month. During these 10 or so days, Lin Chuan and Lin Yang had made a lot of money fishing. Now, the Lin family has about 800 yuan in their hands, not to mention the money for buying clothes and food. The courtyard also knows that Lin's son-in-law is a good angler, and he can catch a lot of fish every day to sell for money, so his attitude towards Wang Shouji and Lin Chuan has also changed a lot. As for those who are concerned about the Lin family's house, they have put aside their plans. After all, the Lin family's life is better, so how could they possibly return to the countryside? After this period of supplementing nutrition, Lin Chuan's body also grew a lot, which made him look even more beautiful. Single men in the yard secretly looked at Lin Chuan and envied the good luck of Lin Yang from this village to marry such a beautiful wife. This morning, Lin Chuan and Lin Yang did not go fishing, and their family was not short of money for the time being. They helped Wang Shouji with the New Year's goods at home. At this moment, a middle-aged woman walked in at the entrance of the courtyard, followed by a beautiful girl. She heard Yan Fugue say, Matchmaker Zhang, who is this going on a blind date with? Zhang Matchmaker smiled and replied, Teacher Yan, this is the person introduced to Jia Dongshu of the Jia family, a girl from the Qin family village in Changping. Upon hearing this, Lin Yang knew that it might be Qinhuai who came, so he couldn't help but look towards the door. This secretly revealed that he was truly someone who could charm the foolish pillar. Qinhuai, who was 18 years old, looked really good, but she was more than 1 point inferior to Lin Chuan. Just as Lin Yang was looking at Qinhuai, he felt a pain in his arm. When he turned around, he saw Lin Chuan pouting her small mouth and staring at her big eyes, the meaning of which was self-evident. Lin Yang immediately realized and pulled Lin Chuan into the inner room. Wang Shouji ignored the small movements of the two and shook her head. She was not unreasonable either. As long as she didn't cross the line, she wouldn't mind whether the young couple was bored or not. Lin Yang pulled Lin Chuan into the room. Before Lin Chuan could get angry, he immediately kissed her. It wasn't until Lin Chuan couldn't breathe that he let go of her and said, Chuan, she's not as beautiful as you. I'm just curious to see. Don't worry, I only have you in my heart. Lin Chuan was so angry when he was kissed that he pouted and said, You have a smooth tongue. Who would believe your lies? Lin Yang chuckled and said, How do you know you're smooth-tongued? Why don't you try it again? Then he pounced. Until Lin Chuan blushed and Lin Yang came out again, Wang Shouji gave her a pale glance and said, What are you still doing? Hurry up and help with the work. Jia family. At this moment, Jia Zhang's face was gloomy. She had originally planned to marry a city girl for her son, but the conditions of the Jia family were there. The matchmaker said a few things, but when they heard about the Jia family's conditions, they refused directly. There was no way for Jia Zhang to ask the matchmaker to find a rural girl to help Jia Dongshu get married as soon as possible. Today is the day for blind dates, and if they see eye to eye, they can get married early next year. Jia Dongshu also leaned back on the chair, feeling bored. He had no hope for this blind date, after all, what the village aunts would look like. However, his mother arranged for him, and he couldn't refuse. He just wanted to get by with it. Aunt Jia, I have brought you someone. As soon as matchmaker Zhang walked in with Qinhuai, Jia Dongshu felt a bright light in front of her. Her decadent mood was swept away, and a smile appeared on her face. At this time, Qinhuai was still very thin and not as round as later, and Jia and Zhang did not take notice. Matchmaker Zhang smiled and said, "Aunt Jia, this is Qinhuai from Qinjia village, who is 18 years old this year." Jia Zhang looked at Qinhuai and let out a soft sigh. Matchmaker Zhang was taken aback and thought to herself, "Your family doesn't even have a crush on such a beautiful girl. If it weren't for her insistence on marrying into the city, how could it be your turn to marry the Jia family?" Her expression also faded and she said, "Then let the young man chat and let's go out and talk for a while." Jia Zhang reluctantly left the door with Matchmaker Zhang, and Jia Dongshu quickly and enthusiastically said, "Comrade Qinhuai, please take a seat." Qinhuai sat down holding the package and said, "I don't know how to address it yet." At this point, Jia Dongshu was already confused. He thought that even a beautiful girl would be difficult to find such a beautiful daughter.in-law in the city. It wasn't until Qinhuai asked him again that he came to his senses and said, "Huairu, my name is Jia Dongshu. You can call me Dongshu." At the entrance of the Jia family, Jia Zhang and Matchmaker Zhang were like a pair of door gods, and neither of them paid attention to each other. Matchmaker Zhang said, "Jia Zhang, don't be unwilling either. If you don't like it, just say it directly. I'll take the girl with me in a moment." At this moment, Jia Zhang also understood that the matchmaker couldn't offend him. Dong Su still hoped for someone to propose a marriage in the future, so he smiled and said, "Sister Zhang, look at this girl who is as thin as a bamboo pole. How can she work in the future? You should find a good one to raise for my family, Dong Su." Before Matchmaker Zhang could speak, Jia Dongshu came out and said, "Mom, go cut some meat and let silly Zhu do it. We'll treat Aunt Zhang and Huairu later." After finishing, he went into the room. Jia Zhang and Matchmaker Zhang were taken aback by the words, and Matchmaker Zhang said, "Is your son in love?" Although Jia Zhang was reluctant in her heart, she knew her own son's temperament and sighed, "Sure, I'll go buy some meat. Zhang will have some lunch together." Matchmaker Zhang just smiled and said, "Okay, this is a big good thing. I want to feel happy." After finishing lunch, the situation is basically settled. The dowry is 10 yuan, and I will buy a sewing machine. After the Chinese New Year, I will get married. After seeing off Matchmaker Zhang, Zhonghai arrived at the Jia family and asked, "Dongshu, have you made a decision?" Jia Dongshu nodded with a smile and said, Master, it's just her." Zhonghai took out 100 yuan and said, "Dongshu, this is a little favor from the master. Put it away. I think the girl is a sensible girl. They will live a good life in the future." Jia Dongshu took the money and his eyes turned red with gratitude, saying, "Thank you, master." Zhonghai patted Jia Dongshu on the shoulder and said, "What do you think, silly child? I am your master. I will be a teacher for a day and a father for a lifetime. How can my master ignore you? If you encounter any difficulties in the future, just tell my master." Jia Dongshu nodded and said, "I know, master." Jia Zhang secretly cursed Zhonghai for being shameless. If he didn't want Dong Su to take care of him, he would have been so kind to him. However, it's also good. Zhonghai and his wife don't have children, and not all of their assets will belong to their own sons in the future. As for taking care of him, he can only give him a stuttering when he can't move. Chapter 9. New Year's Eve. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With this in mind, Jia Zhang put on a pitiful expression and said, his eldest son, "Thank you for your help these years. Otherwise, how can we live as orphans and widows? Don't worry, in the future, Dong Su will be your own son. I will definitely let him take care of you and see you off." After hearing this, Zhonghai was very satisfied in his heart. The way he helped the Jia family was not just to help Jia Dongshu care for him, so he smiled and said, "What are you doing with this, sister.in-law? I am Master Dongshu, can I not help him? Alright, I should go back now, and you are also preparing to celebrate the Chinese New Year together tomorrow. After that, he turned around and left the room. Chinese New Year's Eve, New Year's Eve. Lin Yang initially sat around the table with Wang Xiuji and 3 people. There was a fish, a chicken, a pot of braised pork belly and 2 vegetarian dishes on the table. Now, they are very luxurious. Wang Xiuji poured a bottle of wine onto Lin Yang and said with a smile, Yangzi, it's thanks to you that our family can live this unimaginable life this year. Come and let's take a walk. How could Lin Yang have asked his elders to pour wine? He quickly got up and grabbed a bottle to fill it with Wang Xiuji. As for Lin Chuan, just drink some Arctic soda. Wang Xiuji raised her glass and said, Yangzi, it's all thanks to you that our family can live like this now. Let me toast you. After finishing the drink, Lin Chuan also cheered along. After finishing his drink, Lin Yang poured Wang Xiuji again and said, Aunt Wang, what are you talking about? If it weren't for you, I would have frozen to death in the alley long ago, let alone married a wife as good as Chuan. I should respect you. He lifted his glass and drank a toast. Upon hearing this, Lin Chuan glared at Lin Yang and blushed, saying, Who is your wife? Wang Xiuji saw that the young couple had such a good relationship and smiled, I can't say that. If it weren't for you, our mother and I would definitely be bullied to death. We would have to go back to the village to live, and at first, we could only marry a farmer and farm land for a lifetime. There's no such thing as a good life today. Mom will wait until you reach the age next year to get married quickly, and then she can truly let go. Wang Xiuji knew that it was difficult to find a capable son-in-law like Lin Yang. She must let her daughter catch him and not let anyone else run him away. So she continued, Yangzi, it's enough to celebrate your child's birthday in early March next year. Can you go back to the village and open an introduction letter for an extra year so that you can get married as soon as possible? Lin Yang didn't expect Wang Xiuji to be so anxious. He didn't know that Wang Xiuji was afraid of being cheated by others. This may have been Qinhuai's attempt to stab Wang Xiuji in the courtyard, so he nodded and said, it shouldn't be a problem. The village is all relatives, so it shouldn't be difficult. Wang Xiuji smiled and said, Alright, after the Chinese New Year, you can go back to the village to open a letter of introduction, and you will receive the certificate in March. Lin Chuan suddenly felt his face burning and stood up, saying, Mom, if you say more, I'll go back to the house. Wang Xiuji laughed heartily and said, Okay, Mom won't say it anymore. Let's have dinner. The courtyard is filled with meat fragrance everywhere, and the workers have been busy for a year, waiting for the Chinese New Year to improve their lives, so every household emits meat fragrance. Zhonghai and the deaf old lady of the Jia family are both celebrating the Chinese New Year at the Jia family. Rainwater's small face is full of displeasure. Every time there are Jia's Zhang family and Jia Dongshu during the Chinese New Year, she can't eat much meat and has been robbed by the devout old lady of the Jia Zhang family. At night, when it was time to go to bed, Wang Xiuji drove Lin Yang to the inner room. In Wang Xiuji's opinion, getting married in March next year, going to bed early for a few days was not a big deal. Besides, as long as we slept together, Lin Yang couldn't run away. When Lin Chuan saw Lin Yang come in, she immediately crawled into bed like a little rabbit, covering herself for her whole life and not daring to show her head. Wang Xiuji had told her about this, and yesterday Qinhuai came, which made the little girl feel a sense of crisis, so she took the opportunity to respond. However, seeing Lin Yang come in at this moment, the little girl still trembled all over and felt extremely anxious. Lin Yang crawled into the bed and held Lin Chuan in his arms without any movement. It wasn't until Lin Chuan adapted that he trembled and said, Brother Yang, will you always be good to me? Lin Yang nodded on Lin Chuan's forehead and said, Of course, I will always be good to you in the future. Lin Chuan gritted his teeth and covered the two with a blanket. In 1954, on the first day of the Lunar New Year. The young couple came out of the room dressed neatly, and Wang Xiuji, with a pair of dark circles under her eyes, said, "The food is ready. You guys go eat, I'll take a nap." Lin Chuan blushed with embarrassment upon hearing the words, and fiercely pinched Lin Yang's waist. Lin Yang, who was in a relaxed mood, grinned in unison. Looking at the mischievous daughter-in-law, Lin Yang's mouth slightly curled up, which was still the result of his lack of enjoyment. You should know that Lin Yang has a true dragon bloodline. After breakfast, Lin Yang came to the yard and saw Yan Fugue looking at Lin Yang strangely. Lin Yang's old face said with a red heart that it was not what Yan Fugue heard last night. It seems that in the future, we should make a sound insulation array to sleep at night, or our mother-in-law will not sleep well. Good morning, Grandpa San. Yan Fugue extended his thumb and said mysteriously, "You're really good, kid." Upon hearing this, Lin Yang said solemnly, "Uncle San, don't talk nonsense. Yesterday was Chuan who fell in the leg, and it hurt so much that he snorted all night. Don't talk nonsense. This is not just for fun." Yan Fugue looked at Lin Yang suspiciously and saw that Lin Yang had a positive expression on his face. He thought to himself, "Did I guess wrong? Isn't that what happened?" Thinking again that with Wang Xiuji at home, Lin Yang couldn't have done anything out of line. So he laughed and said, "I see. Third Master misunderstood. Third Master even said he wanted to remind you that there are many people in this courtyard and their mouths are mixed. If anything comes out, it's hard to say, isn't it?" Upon hearing this, Lin Yang pouted inwardly. Didn't he want to take advantage of it? So he rolled his eyes and smiled, "Then I'll thank Mr. San." Yan Fugue waved his hand and said, "No need, they're all neighbors. Since that's not the case, I can rest assured." In the blink of an eye, in early March, Lin Yanglin suddenly returned to the courtyard with a mountain chicken chatting and laughing. Yan Fugue greeted him and said, "Yangzi, have you gone hunting?" Lin Yang raised the pheasant in his hand and said, "No, it's not. But I'll only get one. There are too few prey now, so it's not easy to fight." Yan Fugue looked at Lin Yang's pheasant weighing 5 or 6 pounds in his hand and said, "Yangzi, do you think you should let the 3 aunties help you kill the chicken? Lin Chuan is unwilling anymore. Now that there is a lot of meat and wealth, what situation does she not know about Uncle San's family? Not to mention that the chicken's internal organs are gone after killing, even the chicken's head will be chopped off, and it is connected to half of the neck." So he blocked Yan Fugue and said, "Uncle San, my mother can kill chickens, so don't bother Aunt San. Besides, my favorite food is chicken liver." Upon hearing this, Yan Fugue sneered and said, "All right, those 3 masters won't bother you anymore." Wang Xiuji had seen this scene a long time ago, but she didn't come forward to speak. She wanted to see how her son-in-law and daughter would handle it, and the result was very satisfactory. She welcomed the chicken and smiled, saying, "This chicken is very fat, weighing 5 or 6 pounds. Mom will stew it for you tonight." Lin Chuan licked his lips and said, "Mom, I want to drink chicken soup. You can boil it for a while longer so that it will taste better." Wang Xiuji gave Lin Chuan a white glance and said, "You're getting more and more picky now, it's all because of Yang Zi's habit." Lin Chuan held Lin Yang's arm and raised his head proudly, saying, "That's right, Brother Yang can only spoil me." Chapter 10. Qinhuai Ru entering the hospital. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wang Xiuji looked at her proud daughter and rolled her eyes, saying, "I didn't see you. You dodge me and go kill the chicken." She then pushed Lin Chuan away and walked towards the pool in the courtyard. Upon arriving at the pool, I happened to see Grandma Zhang washing clothes for her grandson Iron Egg. With a smile in her heart, she said, "Grandma Zhang, do me a favor and kill the chicken. I don't have anyone to eat the chicken's internal organs at home, so I'll give them all to you." Grandma Zhang knew that Wang Xiuji wanted to help her family. Thinking about her grandson's thin and weak body, she didn't feign a sigh and said, "Cheng, let me help you kill you. I'll kill you later and send it to you." Wang Xiuji put down the mountain chicken and smiled, "Okay, then I'll go back first. There's really something going on at home." After finishing, she turned around and returned to the front yard. "Grandma Zhang, this chicken weighs 5 or 6 pounds and has a lot of internal organs. You've managed to catch it this time," said Aunt Air, who was washing clothes on the side with envy. Grandma Zhang smiled silently and lowered her head to get busy. The third aunt saw Wang Xiuji come back empty-handed and asked, "Miss Wang, didn't you go to kill a chicken?" Wang Xiuji smiled and said, "I didn't just remember that there was something else at home, so I asked Grandma Zhang to help me kill it. Then I'll give her all the chicken organs." After saying that, she went home. When Aunt San returned home, she said to Yan Fugue, "Old man, this Wang Xiuji is really not authentic. We are still neighbors, so why don't we kill our family, but we have to kill Mrs. Zhang." Upon hearing this, Yan Fugue sighed and said, "Did you help them when they were in trouble?" "Not only did we not have any help, but we also cared about their house. You really don't know how to treat them." Grandma Zhang helped out during the most difficult time for the Lin family, and it's understandable for them to think about Grandma Zhang. How did we know that the Lin family could turn around? It's also because we didn't plan well. The good thing in the future is that we believe we can take advantage sooner or later. After thinking about it, the old man nodded and said, "You're still right, old man. After all, we are neighbors and our days will grow." When Wang Xiuji returned home, she saw her daughter and son-in-law both inside and didn't disturb them. However, Lin Chuan heard the commotion and came out curious, asking, "Mom, didn't you go kill a chicken?" Wang Xiuji smiled and said, "Kill Grandma Zhang and give her all the chicken offal. It's not easy for Grandma Zhang to take her grandson with her. If we can help, we'll just give you a hand, but your chicken liver is gone." Lin Chuan smiled and said, "It's okay. I'm willing to help Grandma Zhang. It's okay not to eat chicken liver." Turning his head, he hugged Lin Yang's arm and coquettishly said, "Brother Yang, how about we catch a pheasant next time?" Lin Yang pinched Lin Chuan's small face and smiled, "Okay, let's eat whatever my family Chuan wants." Lin Chuan happily hugged Lin Yang's arm and said, "Brother Yang is really good." Wang Xiuji thought to herself, "I haven't eaten yet. I've had enough dog food first." She glanced at her daughter and said, "Be careful, I'm still here." Upon hearing this, Lin Chuan not only didn't let go, but also hugged him tighter and proudly said, "I don't break the law by hugging my own man." Wang Xiuji rolled her eyes at the words and went straight to the kitchen to cook. After finishing lunch, I received the news of the conference. Lin Yang also wanted to see the legendary quadrangle assembly, so he brought Lin Chuan to the courtyard early on. Before long, all the neighbors in the yard arrived. Zhonghai coughed lightly and said, "Today we are gathering everyone in the yard because there is a happy event in our yard. Jia Dongshu from the courtyard will get married on March 6th, the day after tomorrow. We invite our neighbors to have a wedding banquet." At this moment, Jia Dongshu walked to the center and bowed with a smile, saying, "The day after tomorrow, I will get married. The uncles and uncles in the courtyard will all come to support me." After Jia Dongshu left, Zhonghai said again, "Everyone knows that life is not easy now, so each family will send someone to eat at the banquet. Of course, the portion money will be given according to the situation, with more for the wealthy and less for the difficult. That's all for today. Alright, let's break up." The corners of his mouth moved in his bangs, but he still didn't speak. However, he didn't feel very comfortable in his heart. It's unreasonable not to let this second uncle speak on such a day. Lin Yang doesn't have much interest in anything, and there isn't much to watch at this entire conference. However, there haven't been any incidents of turning things around yet, so of course he won't be interested. Returning home, Wang Xiuji said to Lin Yang, "Yangzi, after Jia Dongshu gets married, you can go back and open a letter of introduction." Only when you have obtained your mother's certificate can the stone in your heart land. Lin Yang looked at the shy Lin Chuan and nodded, saying, okay, when Jia Dongxiu gets married, I'll go back and open a letter of introduction, and also move my household registration over. You should know that Lin Yang is still a rural household registration, and it will be even more difficult to move the household registration starting from 1958, especially since 2020 when the urban population will be streamlined, which is even more impossible. This is a big matter related to the future food quantity. Although Lin Yang is not afraid of not having enough food to eat, eating with a certain quantity can also cover up the ears of others. Wang Shouji heard this and said happily, okay, when you have a child, Mom will take care of you. Lin Chuan blushed with embarrassment and stomped his feet angrily, Mom, what are you saying? After finishing speaking, Wang Shouji and Lin Yang ran into the room with a red face, and the two of them exchanged a glance and laughed heartily. On March 6, the weather is sunny. At the entrance of the quadrangle, Jia Dongxiu led Qinhuai, dressed in a big red floral jacket, into the courtyard. Not to mention that Qinhuai was still quite attractive at this time, besides being a bit thin, she was really a beautiful woman, especially the silly pillar Su Damao at the entrance, whose eyes were straight. The banquet has been set up in the courtyard, with men from every family attending. Yan Fugui is collecting gifts and keeping accounts on the side, while the only one from the Lin family is Wang Shouji. Therefore, Lin Chuan did not come to steal the attention of Qinhuai. Wang Shouji is living a good life now, and her complexion has improved significantly. She also generously gave a gift of 1 yuan, which made Jia Zhang's face smile. Due to the support of Zhonghai and the fact that the banquet was made by silly pillars, it was still quite sumptuous. After everyone had eaten and drank, they gave their blessings and left. The next morning, Jia Dongxiu kept a smile on his face, being polite to everyone. This was when people feel refreshed during happy events. A few more days later, in Linjia village, Changping. Lin Yang stood at the entrance of the village with a complex gaze towards the village. Yang Zi has returned, how are you doing in the city? Many familiar villagers greeted Lin Yang, and Lin Yang responded with a smile one by one. However, Lin Yang did not go home, but went directly to the village committee. As soon as he entered, he said to a middle-aged man, village chief, I will write a letter of introduction to get married and move my household registration to the 49th city. Village chief Lin Dahu looked at Lin Yang and felt sorry for the child. Now that he heard that Lin Yang was getting married in the city, he was also happy for him. He smiled and said, Yangzi, this is a good thing. I will write a letter of introduction for you later.